A question people occasionally ask is also one that I think of myself regularly. Because after all, chances are everyone will face it at some point. So what would I do if I had cancer? After all, you never know when or how you're going to get the bad news.
Whoa! This is still nothing compared to what the master... Rod!
Nothing.
No, Rod!
I feel a lump.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
How long have you been doing this, Dr.
Long time. Yes, I've seen moles so big they have their own moles.
I was watching a video by a doctor influencer the other day. Not one that I regularly watch, but the title was very interesting and grabbed my attention. It was something like, "The lie I regret telling my patients." People would apparently always ask her what she would do if she had cancer when they had cancer. She would always say that she would do all the recommended steps like chemo and radiation. Then one day it was her mother who had cancer, and she even said the same thing to her own mother. Then her mother asked again, and this time she told the truth, that she would reduce her carbs as much as possible as soon as possible. Unfortunately, we live in a world where professional opinions are not only discouraged in doctors, but often essentially made illegal. They're not allowed to exercise their own personal judgment or to benefit from their own experiences. They're strong-armed into following guidelines to the letter that are dreamed up behind the scenes, often by people who have little or no scientific education at all. And in fact, you'd be surprised how little the average doctor has, for that matter. They're usually determined by businessmen who have a very strong personal, financial interest in making sure certain treatments are given and that healthy lifestyle and inexpensive options are ignored. These people also worm their way into the food supply, the proverbial worm in the apple, as it were. And they have a huge budget for marketing or even for simply buying out distributors to get their way.
Between 1/3 and 50% of all produce gets thrown out before it even gets to the consumer because it goes bad. But a peel is doing something to fix that. Basically, taking a cue from nature, they are creating an extra peel for produce. And they do so using leftover plant-based materials. This protective peel is then applied to the produce, and it can actually double the life of whatever it's on without affecting the taste and with no harmful chemicals.
I don't have cancer at the moment, at least not so far as I know. The thing is, cancer takes time to develop. It usually takes years or even decades for this to happen. So why is that? If this were a simple genetic mutation, as Big Pharma likes to claim, shouldn't cancer turn on and off like a light switch? Well, there are many causative agents for cancer, from radiation to artificial food additives. They all share something in common. They all damage mitochondria. Surprisingly, people in the nuclear power industry tend to have not more cancer than others in the same communities, but less. I've gone into possible reasons why in past videos, but what's really interesting is what happens when we look at people exposed to large doses of radiation. If they survive the initial cancer dose, which kills many cells in the body outright, you'd expect that they would instantaneously develop cancer. In reality, while they do perish at a much higher rate from cancer than co-workers who did not get a large exposure, it tends to come on only years and years later. The likely explanation is that cancer is largely a disease of the mitochondria. This is where energy is created in the body and where the byproducts of energy metabolism are cleaned up. When they're not working properly, that means the byproducts turn into genotoxins like malondialdehyde, which then damage the mitochondria and eventually the DNA in the cell nucleus itself. And over time, the nuclear DNA accumulates so many unusual mutations that it becomes cancerous, and it also requires mitochondria in order to repair the damage to your nuclear DNA. Perhaps the most well-known of these so-called oncogenes is the p53 gene. When this is altered, it activates the cell to create energy through fermentation. All doctors know of this gene, but most of them don't know that this is the gene responsible for the Warburg effect, that is, the consumption of large amounts of sugar by cancer cells, and most of them don't know that this is actually caused by fermentation of carbohydrates in the cell. Make no mistake though, it's not ATP these cancer cells need any more than plants crave electrolytes.
It's got electrolytes.
What are electrolytes? Do you even know?
It's actually just building materials. The scary part of this process is that, just like fermentation in yogurt, these cells actually create any protein they require using this process. Just like single-cell amoebas do, everything they need is provided simply by sugar and through other elements plentiful in the bloodstream. That's why it's such a terrifying ailment.
Oh my god. Oh, why? What? Negative's good? Oh!
Sugar consumption definitely runs rampant in cancer cells, but this is where many people try hard to fight against this theory because it goes against their sugar addiction and their brainwashing. They don't want to face the reality that the main problem leading to cancer today is simply a bad diet. To be fair, you might more properly say that it's the reactive oxygen species that drive cancer, just like they drive aging in the body. They are both products of genetic damage to mitochondria and nuclear DNA at the end of the day, and things that prevent this damage or reverse it can help delay the ravages of time. ROS are free radicals generated during cellular metabolism, and they are the main way your mitochondria and the nuclei in your cells accrue genetic damage over time. Your body also has a way to clean this up, but it often fails. This is especially true when cells use carbohydrate for fuel instead of fat. In spite of common misconception, fat is always the main fuel used for energy production in the body, except during strenuous, prolonged exercise such as running. Yet we also burn several times more carbs when we consume a carb-rich diet. About 80% of our energy production is going to come from fat when we're not in ketosis, but this can go up to as high as 95% when we are in ketosis, especially the deep ketosis brought about by fasting. But burning fat requires oxygen and also healthy mitochondria, so when mitochondria are damaged, this leads to even greater damage by the further production of more ROS that damage the genes of the mitochondria, and these are very difficult to repair because they only have one set of DNA, unlike nuclear DNA. It is also the case that carb burning is simply inherently worse because by going through all of the steps of the mitochondrial transport cycle, you produce much more free radicals and you clean up less of the mess. At best, you can only break even, while with fat burning, you can actually clean up more free radicals than it produces. This is also why some supplements like methylene blue can be helpful for your cells. They jump ahead in the process even further along. That means they can do a great deal to clean up previously generated free radicals before they can react with your DNA and cause damage. At least 66% more ROS is generated from carb burning, and unless you're in ketosis, your brain is forced to burn carbohydrate only. So if you want to keep from aging your brain in particular, cut down the carbs and cut down your eating window as well. The more you do, the better you're going to feel in the long term, especially mentally. So yes, excessive carbs in the diet are a problem for cancer and for dementia too. In fact, they're bad in the diet as far as ROS is concerned too, and as far as aging goes. PUFAs like linoleic acid also cause problems because this is what binds to reactive oxygen species to form nasty genotoxic substances like malondialdehyde. But everything else around you that damages mitochondria is also a big problem. That's a common side effect in endless medications, especially psych meds. So be careful of your local pill-pushing doctor who will give you all kinds of life-changing meds the second you say you don't feel 100% cheerful or that you have a cough or some other minor ailment. It's also a big problem for many chemicals, especially in America, because a lot of stuff that's banned in Europe and other places is not banned in America. Radiation, of course, is also a big problem, and the list goes on and on. As the story goes, a guy went into a library and he asked where all the books on paranoia were, and the librarian said, "They're all around you." That really is true in this case, though. It is clear sugar and starch are one of the most insidious causes, so don't be lured in.
All right. Someone else's loss is my chocolatey goodness.
Since I know reactive oxygen species drives cancer and aging, and since I know cancer thrives on sugar, the first thing I would do is go zero carb. A little lettuce is fine, though I would stay away from other greens due to oxalates and other issues, but any other carbs are going to increase these issues. The nutrients in animal products also have a great deal of effect on mitochondrial health, glycine and taurine in particular. So make sure you get real nutrition, not a bunch of rabbit food. In fact, while I have videos explaining each one, most of the supplements in the video description are going to help your mitochondria to some degree. So will supplements like PQQ and urolithin A, and even creatine. All of these are a no-brainer to take daily if you have cancer, so if you're not doing so already, then now is the time to start. These are all either nutrients we don't get enough of in the diet because of modern issues like not eating lots of broth, or they're things made inside of the body which we just don't make enough of as we age. You're only going to get so much out of the diet though. It may help with the prevention and slow down progression, but you can only get so much out of it. That's why I would immediately start fasting too. You can reduce blood sugar through the diet, but never as much as you could while fasting. In fact, when you have ketones in your bloodstream, your blood sugar can safely go down to levels that are much lower than you could get to while not in deep ketosis, especially when you're doing multi-day fasts. And otherwise, if your blood sugar went down that low, you would have a very big medical problem. It's not easy to fast though, so I'd start immediately, but not directly into a very long fast. I would start with a 36-hour fast and go immediately into a 36-12 eating pattern, aka alternate day fasting. Combined with the zero carb diet, this would keep me in ketosis 24/7 and keep my blood sugar as low as possible in a healthy manner. But don't think this is where all the benefits of fasting lie. You may have heard that inflammation causes cancer. That might seem like a mysterious claim, but I did leave you with a clue in my last section. It requires oxygen to clean up the byproducts of energy metabolism in the body, and the more inflamed your body is, the more difficult it is to get enough oxygen. In fact, you always have some anaerobic energy production in the body, but this is about 5% or less in healthy people. But as your inflammation goes up, this goes up and up too. So how do you reduce inflammation? If you have a lower carb diet and you're fasting regularly, well, you're already doing it. It is the insulin that drives up inflammation, and the reason that inflammatory cytokines go up as we age, which makes things worse, is that your immune cells like macrophages just can't get these damaged cells out of the picture because they can't even get to them. So the problem tends to get worse and worse over time, but fasting can break this cycle and get you firing on all 4 cylinders again.
Never seen it do that before.
Me neither.
Wow! You're some kind of magic man!
No, you are the magic man.
Wow!
I suggest you put that into a high-yield mutual fund. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have much work to do.
It's actually the immune system itself that fights cancer off. Cells like macrophages and T cells are the elite warriors that protect the body from all invaders, and this includes writing cancer cells. The same senescent cells that send out inflammatory cytokines are the damaged zombie cells that typically become cancer cells over time. If your immune system is healthy and inflammation is low, your immune system can destroy these cells long before they become cancerous. Many people take quercetin and other highly refined supplements for the same purpose, but bilberry powder is a more natural way to get these benefits, and it also has other polyphenols in there that can help you. And while you can't do it all the time, the best way, of course, is simply through fasting. Fasting also has the effect of totally regenerating your white blood cells, including the macrophages. These cells can also become senescent over time, and it's theorized that when this happens, they can actually spread cancer throughout the body.
First, we need to look at the metastatic cascade. So the metastatic cascade is a series of events that underlie the origin from any tissue. Breast cancer, colon cancer, bladder cancer, all these different cancers to spread around the body go through the same cascade. First, there's a local invasion. So here are the green cells represented as the cancer cells. They become metabolically destabilized, enter their default state of proliferation, and eventually break through the basement membrane and enter into the local tissue. Intravasation. Now, some of these cells have the ability to enter into the blood vessels and then avoid the immune system and actually suppress the immune system. So survival and immunosuppressive effects. They also move through the bloodstream and extravasate, leave the bloodstream, and form tumors in distant organs. And that's ultimately what we call cancer spread or metastasis. So a question is, how can the accumulation of random somatic mutations cause a non-random metastatic cascade based on the epithelial mesenchymal transition, which I haven't talked about, but this is the basis for cancer metastasis based on the somatic mutation theory. It makes no sense. So the question is, how do we explain all of this based on the mitochondrial metabolic theory of cancer? So it is linked to the macrophage fusion hypothesis. Macrophages, these red cells, are actually guardians of our body. They're wound healing cells. They patrol our entire body. They enter and exit bloodstream. They work with the immune system. They are part of the immune system. So when we have an incipient, here's normal epithelial cells. Many cancers arise from epithelial cells. So they become destabilized by any one of the provocative agents. They have destabilized energy metabolism. They're entering their default state, but they are not capable of spreading around the body. Our immune cells come into this microenvironment, recognizing cancer as an unhealed wound, and they begin to throw out growth factors and cytokines, which is like putting gasoline on the fire. It stimulates these incipient cancer cells to grow even more disorganized and dysregulated. The immune cells will fuse to put out heal the wound. They'll either fuse together or fuse with the cancer, these incipient cancer cells, thereby diluting the cytoplasm with abnormal mitochondria. Now what you have is these rogue macrophages, former immune cells. They are already genetically programmed to spread throughout the body because this is what they do in their normal function. But now they are metabolically destabilized with a genetic architecture to spread around the body. And that's what they do. They intravasate and they suppress the immune system, and they are the tumor cells that will be the most deadly. And they are heavily dependent on glutamine and glucose for their survival. So recognizing that all cancer cells require glutamine and glucose, especially the metastatic cells.
A single 72-hour fast will generate up to 1/3 of your white blood cells, and this includes your macrophages, which are very important for cleaning out debris like tumors and scars in the body. It also releases stem cells into your bloodstream. Like macrophages, stem cells release mitochondria into the body, and the mitochondria in your stem cells are the best preserved mitochondria in your entire body. Stem cells can also settle in any organ in the body and create new and healthy cells as needed. These same stem cells are required in large numbers to create new T cells and Treg cells, which are required to successfully fight off both cancer and autoimmune disease. This includes making sure your own body is not damaged by the very thing that's fighting off the cancer. Taurine is particularly in demand when you have cancer, so the more you can get down, the better. I currently take 6 grams a day, but I would increase it even further if I knew that I had cancer. Virtually everything your immune cells do to fight cancer requires taurine, and this taurine is used up quickly in these situations. There's many reasons why this is so, and I have dedicated videos on taurine, but you don't need to know all the details to reap the rewards.
These are priority number 1. We want as many as we can get our hands on.
What do you call those things?
I don't know, things that make it go.
Professor Seyfried is a cancer researcher who has had great success working with oncologists to treat cancer patients using a similar protocol. On top of this, he adds Febendezole, an over-the-counter dog medication sold for parasites, which can also be prescribed for humans. The purpose of this is to block the release of glutamine in the body. Along with carbohydrate, glutamine is the other material that cancer can use, not just for energy production, but also for the production of new proteins and lipids that it can use to create new cancer cells in the body.
The importance of our new paper that appeared in ASN Neuro last week shows for the first time that amino acid fermentation can also participate in the dysregulated growth of the tumor cell. And the amino acid that we're speaking predominantly about is glutamine. And we tested all 20 amino acids. We interrogated the cancer cells, both mouse and human glioblastoma cells. We interrogated them to ask what fuels could they use to maintain their growth. So the way we do this is very simple. We just take the tumor cells and we grow them in saline, salt solution. And of course, there's no food. There's nothing for them to eat. And then you take and time them to see how fast they die with no food. And mouse cells, because they have a very high basal metabolic rate, 7 times faster than that of the human, they die quick when you take away their fuels. Mouse cells will die in 24 hours. Human cells will die in about 72 hours, 48 to 72 hours with no fuel, just in what we call a buffered saline solution. And then what we do is we simply add individual amino acids back, and we see whether or not the viability of the cells is improved. And what we see, we do this both in the presence and absence of glucose. So glucose alone will keep the cells alive longer, but then they die because they don't have any nitrogen source. And we do it without glucose. So we just do it in pure nothing, and then we add glucose, and then we add individual amino acids back. And what we see is when we add the amino acid glutamine, these cells explode in growth capacity relative to all other amino acids. Now, we found a little bit of stimulation from glutamate because it's the first product that glutamine is metabolized to. But it's not nearly as powerful as glutamine. None of the other amino acids had anything come close to how powerful glutamine is. So the question is, and when you have glucose and glutamine, the two pathways, the two fuels are synergistic in providing all of the metabolites and all of the energy needed for rapid dysregulated growth. So the question is, how is glutamine able to facilitate the growth of the tumor? Is it respired through the respiration? It's called an anaplerotic respiratory process, where the carbons of glutamine enter into the TCA cycle to produce reducing equivalents, allowing oxidative phosphorylation to operate, producing energy. Or is the glutamine fermented, which is generating energy through mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation in the succinyl-CoA ligase step within the Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle? So what we did, and why this paper is so important, is we were able to test this hypothesis many different ways. So we would take all of the glucose away from the tumor in the presence of oxygen and then give glutamine, and we found that the cells could survive with oxygen and glutamine in the absence of glucose. But then that doesn't tell us whether the glutamine is fermented or is respired. So we repeated the experiment, this time removing all the oxygen. We grew them in a deep hypoxia in the absence of glucose. And we still got ATP production in these cells. Yes, it was significantly reduced, but it was still being produced. ATP was still being produced in the cancer cells in the absence of oxygen and in the absence of glucose. So the question is, where is that ATP coming from? So we think it's coming from the substrate level phosphorylation in the TCA cycle.
Well, there's endless misguided people who are obsessed with trying to show that fat is dangerous, not carbs. Fat can't be used as a fermentation source to create new proteins, which is the real danger of fermentation. In fact, it can't be used to make ATP without oxygen either, and cancer cells are usually hypoxic, and when they do encounter oxygen, they use it up very quickly. Oxygen is also often lethal to cancer cells, as it allows the mitochondria to operate properly, and that can allow them to force the cancer cells into apoptosis, controlled cell death, and that's the end of the cancer cell. Oxygen can also bind to hoarded iron in the cancer cells, and this can simply cause the cancer cell to just explode. Thankfully, lowering inflammation through fasting and a low-carb diet will also allow more oxygen to get to these cells, especially as macrophages are able to finally get in and clean up the damaged cells around them, which are causing more inflammation and blocking them from reaching the cancer. Regardless, this can also be a part of your protocol, especially if you take it during extended fasts. Fasting also limits this activity, but it takes very long fasts to get to the point where it's totally blocked, and that wouldn't necessarily be safe, let alone easy. Dr. Jason Fung, a nephrologist and fasting advocate, recommends fasting 3 days and then eating 3 days. That makes sense because the biggest benefit of fasting will start to kick in around 3 days. That's when you release stem cells, that's when large amounts of white blood cells will be recycled, and that's what's required to create new T cells, and that's also when the maximum autophagy levels are reached. Just keep in mind you need plenty of nutrition to fast successfully, especially taurine, which is basically fuel for the immune system. That's why it's important to get enough nutritious food in your diet, especially plenty of protein from animal products. So long as you get enough nutrition the rest of the time, fasting generally makes you gain lean tissue, not lose it.
The key is that the lean muscle mass, which is your bones and your muscle, are preserved, as opposed to regular weight loss. Like the dirty little secret of most weight loss programs where they restrict calories is that half of that is fat, but half of that is actually muscle and bone that you're losing. The weight that you lose, half of it is muscle and bone. And then when you go off of your diet, because most people do, you regain all fat, which is why they say there's problems with these yo-yo diets, because if you lose 10 kilos, as 5 kilos of fat, 5 kilos of muscle and bone, and then you regain 10 kilos, that 10 kilos was all fat. So you're actually worse off than you were before. And that's the problem with these yo-yo diets. But that doesn't happen when you do it in an intermittent fashion, because if you do the fasting, if you look at the fat, the body weight, so again, this is over about 70 days of alternate daily fasting, so fasting 1 day and then eating 1 day. What you see is that the weight steadily goes down from 96 kilos to 90.8 kilos. But if you look at the fat mass, it goes from 43 down to 38, but the fat-free mass goes from 52 to 51.9, which means that you're burning all pure fat, as opposed to losing bone and losing muscle, which you see with some of these other things.
Even in 6 months of alternate day fasting, the subjects were shown to actually gain lean tissue, not lose it. Also, don't worry too much about fat levels while fasting. It is almost impossible to have too little fat to fast. When you fast, you burn about 1/2 pound of pure fat per day, up to around 2/3 of a pound of fat for larger, taller men. This amount does not change whether you're 5% fat, 10% fat, or 50% fat. Even if you're just 100 pounds and 10% fat, you have 10 pounds of fat you can use for fasting. And this would allow you to fast for at least a week. And people with 10% fat and normal muscle levels are going to seem like they basically have zero fat. In fact, when you're leaner, this releases more growth hormone, which regenerates the stomach and the digestive tract after the fast. So for the people who have trouble eating, frail people, they can regain their appetite through fasting, while overweight people are going to reduce their hunger by fasting because their stomach will shrink. So don't listen to the scaremongers who try to keep you away from a healthy, natural lifestyle. We're stuck with the reality of a big pharma controlled medical system but you can at least keep your mind free of their gaslighting.
He's got away from us, Jack. Afraid you're right, Mr. Hellman. He's gone.
Though I usually like to stick to 36 to 96 hour fasts, you might consider longer fasts when you have a very serious problem. For example, autophagy maximizes at 72 hours, but it doesn't start to go down until you've been fasting for about 2 weeks. That means you can get up to 11 days of maximum autophagy triggered by doing a 2-week fast. This can do wonders for your cells, especially your immune cells and your stem cells. Some people have attacked fasting by saying that cancer cells use autophagy as a protective mechanism, and this means you're going to actually protect the cancer. While it's true that cancer cells are in autophagy generally, it's irrelevant because these cancer cells activate it themselves. In fact, all hypoxic cells are in autophagy because they're lacking in oxygen. But you probably don't want to hold your breath in hopes of healing your cells. Most of the time, autophagy is a response to damage in the body, and the only way to safely activate it is through fasting. In the case of fasting, autophagy is activated to scavenge from within the cell itself for more building materials to create new proteins. Arsenic also stimulates autophagy, and prolonged extreme exercise like a marathon will too, but that doesn't mean it's actually good for you. They're both going to cause a lot of problems. While we have a lot of data from recent years on medium-length fasts up to 4 days, long medical fasts were much more common in the past. Though we have many mechanisms shown for how fasting can benefit you, especially in these moderate fasts, the truth is there could be much more to longer fasts that we simply don't have all of the scientific proof for. Not yet anyway. Remember, most of the data we do have comes from the last 10 years or so. Many people have personal stories of amazing benefits from long fasts. Jody Lorette, wife of arm wrestling champ Devon Lorette, is a very good example.
Good morning, guys, and welcome to day 20 of my 21-day fast. So the next surgery was imminent. I saw a surgeon, we did all kinds of scans, and he determined that the root, in fact, of the meniscus itself, so there was a tear in the meniscus, but the root was detached and there was no fiber connecting it. So sometimes that can heal on its own, but if there's a fiber, but I did not have one according to the scans. That surgery success rate is only about 50%. So right before I did this surgery, I actually did my 11-day fast. I ended it a couple weeks before the actual surgery happened. And during that time, I remember my knee, after a few days in, becoming incredibly inflamed. And I believed that it was stem cells going to work on the knee. So I went in for my surgery, and in the post-op room when I woke up, the surgeon said, "What did you do?" And of course, I was slightly groggy at the time coming out, and I said, what are you talking about? He said, "Your knee root meniscus has reattached itself. I didn't need to do anything to it. I just had to clean up a little tear in the meniscus." And I said, "Well, I fasted for 11 days.
Personally, I would increase my fasting even more if I got diagnosed with cancer. That probably won't happen anytime soon, but for all I know, I've been unknowingly fighting off cancer for years. For that matter, that could be true for anyone watching this video right now, or for any one of their friends or loved ones. The most important thing for preventing cancer and fighting it off is probably getting your insulin levels down. Otherwise, your immune system may simply be unable to even get to the cancer, let alone fight it. And while diet can help here, fasting is by far the quickest way to get your insulin levels down. And a low or zero carb diet is going to make sure that they stay down once they do come down. Fasting also has many other benefits for fighting cancer, particularly when it comes to replenishing the immune cells required to fight it off. It's also very good for your mitochondria. I would also get any required surgeries, personally speaking. Also, personally speaking, I might consider chemo for certain types of cancer, but probably not for all of them, because it has very little effect on slow growing cancers. I would probably also avoid radiation therapy for most types of cancer due to the large glutamine release that this will cause, which can be used as a building block for the cancer cells. You can't really starve cancer, but fasting and a low carb diet does much more than that. Many of the supplements in the description will help with your mitochondria, which should also help prevent cancer, and so will others I've talked about in dedicated videos on the channel. Doctors today always act as if they have all the answers, but remember that their hands are largely tied as to what they can say to you, and they're strongly indoctrinated to obey corporate created policies. As many have realized in the last few years, it's your body being treated, and if they don't do what you expect, you're also the one who's going to have to deal with the consequences.
Give me your watch.
Disable the transponder.
Yeah, but how do you do that?
Here you go.